Susan, oh my God, what an incredible story and effort. And
Thank you.
I applaud you and the neighborhood association, everyone involved in trying to stop this. I mean, especially not only your person, it's not just about your personal farm, it's about the watershed and the springs there and everything. It's just has really huge landscape level implications.
Mhm.
So anyway, thank you for doing what you've been doing. To everybody else, it's good to see you all, I think, although you've not videoing yourselves, but I recognize a lot of names. And thank you for being here today. And my story about the weed ordinance in Louisville won't be anywhere near as complex as Susan's, but nonetheless, I hope you all feel that you'll be learning something from it. And I'm going to start sharing the screen with my talk. I also thank KRC for inviting me to speak. I was challenged by this, by putting this talk together, but I'm happy for it because it gave me personally a chance to reflect on and consolidate the process that so many of us went through to make sure that this new ordinance in the city of Louisville, Metro Louisville, got passed. And so there's a happy ending to the story. And we learned some lessons that I'm hoping you all might find valuable, particularly those of you who might be dealing with change things in your city about ordinances involving plants. And the first lesson I learned is encapsulated in the title of this talk. It's weeds, not weed, because as we were dealing with this and I was chatting with people about it, they all seemed to think that this was going to be an ordinance about marijuana, and it wasn't. So have to make that clear if you're going to be doing a weed ordinance. But it is about revising Louisville's weed ordinance and to enhance community-based conservation, which was the ultimate goal. It is about the environment, and being a biology professor, it's very important to me to enhance community-based conservation, particularly in cities and suburbs. And this talk isn't just by me. I wanted to include Allison Smith of the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability, and thanks also to Barbara Berman, my compadre at Wild Ones Louisville. And it involves a cast of dozens. And you'll be meeting a few of them as I give this talk. So what I'm going to deal with is why change a weed ordinance anyway? And how did it come about? You know, how did it happen? And I'll be giving some details about that. And then what was the final result? And what lessons can we glean about collaborative governance in a way, about in having done this, that I can share with you. So why change a weed ordinance to begin with? Well, Barbara and I had been hearing, since 2020 anyway, because we're both Wild Ones board members. We've been hearing from people who were getting cited and fined, some of them, for growing native plants in their front and even sometimes their backyards. And of course, it's complaint driven. So the Department of Codes and Regs was coming out after either neighbors complained, or in one instance, I couldn't believe it, someone who just drives past this house often in order to go to a Kroger, okay, was stopping and yelling at the woman and complained to Department of Codes and Regs, and that woman didn't even live there. And what this is, I think, an example of is a clash of aesthetics. The expectations from people who are really into the lawn and lawn-centered manicured landscaping, and those who want to try something else in plant native plants in order to sustain the nature around us. And because so many of them sustain pollinators, and insects and all these species are in dire need of help. But often people using native plants are still on a learning curve about, well, how do the plants look? Where should I plant them? And in some cases, over winter, they don't look, they're not green, and some people find that objectionable. Why were they fined? Well, this is the original, I'm going to give you the original old code wording. All premises shall be maintained free from weeds or plant growth in excess of 10 inches. The 10-inch rule, as it's known here. What's a weed? And plant growth. Okay. All noxious weeds shall be prohibited. And there was no definition or place to find out, well, what's a noxious weed in the old code? And finally, they did say a definition of weeds, but weeds shall be defined as all grasses, annual plants, and vegetation other than trees or shrubs, woody plants. However, this term shall not include cultivated flowers and gardens. So here's the deal. What are cultivated plants? Because often people are buying these plants, they're intentional plantings, they're managed, they are purchased in many instances, and still they were being fined. And one woman told us a story of a codes and regs officer coming out and saying, well, what's this plant? And she would say, oh, this is milkweed and it helps the monarch butterfly. And this is ironweed and this is Joe Pye weed, etc. And I think, it doesn't help that many native plants have weed in their common names. And that, of course, made the codes and regs officer say, well, see, they're weeds, cut them back. And she was just, heartbroken at that. So one man's native plant is another man's weed in some instances. What are the consequences of this? And, some people were getting, some of the yards had plants cut down, they had to cut them down, and people was feeling harassed and confused about what the rules were because they didn't even know where to go look in terms of the weed code. And other folks were becoming discouraged about planting native plant gardens at all here. And this really was upsetting to me and Barbara in particular because of the goals in Wild Ones, native plants and society. Anyway, we all know the old maxim that all politics is local, and this weeds ordinance is admittedly about as micro scale local as it gets, but I want to show you how it does have landscape scale implications, not only for nature, but for people and the city as a whole. First of all, this is a map of Jefferson County, and you can see the blue on the map. The county's 333 square miles in size, and a little over a third of it is residentially zoned plant and plantable space within the residentially zoned land. That's the blue on the map. That's about, a third of the county. What you see for comparison in green are the metro parks system, 20 square miles of this 20 parkland, including the parklands over in the southeast part shown in green. But 6% of the county is in natural areas. And as a comparison, so that if even, most of that plantable space in residential is lawn, and if even 10% of that blue could be converted from lawn to growing native plants, that could make a large species conservation district, particularly for the smaller species like insects and birds as habitat for them, and also for other species, animals and plants, connecting the landscape for species across a harsh urban terrain so that the species on the move either daily or in the big species migrations have stepping stones and corridors through that landscape. In other words, gas stations, highways, and rest stops for them as they move through harsh urban terrain. And that is how urban systems, cities, can contribute to species conservation at larger scales. So here's some of the details, pathways and people in this process. So how did it happen? And here's an overview of how it happened. It started, I'm giving you a little bit of a timeline too. This is February 2021 when WOW citizens groups and some individuals, and particularly Wild Ones and Louisville and Beargrass Thunder, we reached out to certain Metro Council people you're going to hear about in particular. And we also reached out to Allison Smith, the Assistant Director then of the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability. And there we'll see involvement of the Department of Codes and Regs staff and its director, Robert Kirchdorfer, and also reaching out again and how the pathway led to Metro Council and how it comes a draft became a bill. And then finally it's signing by our mayor about 13 months later. So some details. Barbara and I took our first steps in contacting government was our own Metro Councilwoman, Cassie Armstrong. And we had a Zoom meeting with her, and she gave us a lot of advice about the process. And we also talked to her about the issue, and here's what we told her. And when you do reach people, and we were Zooming, make sure the problem and what and who it affects are made clear. And we told her about the old weed ordinance being poorly defined and penalizing property owners and being confusing and becoming a barrier to people adopting natural landscaping in Louisville, and that this was an issue, a conservation issue. And that whatever the new code should be, should provide people and native landscapers greater clarity for replacing lawn with managed natural landscapes that use more native plants. And it would give them more confidence to do so if they were going to be cited. And then we did tell her why our managed natural landscapes needed in our city to begin with. And one of the things, you know, is lessons learned, and I'll repeat it, but is try to always bring it back to people. We knew we weren't going to win our case necessarily with everybody making a species conservation case. It is one, but you know, it's easy also in this instance to make an environmental health equals human health case. And so whenever you can bring it back to people, it's a good idea to do so. And we made the case that the new code could be a win-win for nature and people. So I always provide this one slide to make the case, which I did several times during this process. And I showed pictures I took on my, near my neighborhood. And, it's about the lawn and replacing lawn is what it comes down to. And I said, it's fine to have some lawn, but do we have to have so much of it? 40 million acres of turf grass in the US of lawn, and it's the largest irrigated crop in the USA, more so than irrigated corn. And it is very, uses a lot of fossil fuels, which we're all trying to get off of, and not just for the mowing and the blowing, but the production of fertilizer. In the fertilizer itself, it uses methane, and which is a fossil fuel, it's natural gas, to make it. And pesticides are often fossil fuel based. It also requires frequent watering. And as a result, you get low biodiversity in this lawn for pollinators and birds. I mean, it's just, basically one species of grass. And it creates all this fossil fuel use and everything, also creates a lot of air pollution and noise pollution and water pollution. And despite all the resources being used and all the pollution, and of course has issues for our health. All those resources and pollution that it creates, we can't even eat it. It's not even a crop really that is edible or useful in any other way. It's purely aesthetic. Some details about how it did happen. Barbara and I then did our homework and researched weed ordinances in other cities as models. And turned out Minneapolis was a great one to use. And we wrote our first draft of a new ordinance and met again with Councilwoman Armstrong and asked her more about how to proceed. And that led us to realize I have to get in touch with people in Metro government and to help write a draft ordinance and put it in ordinance language. And lucky for us, we had Allison Smith, who became advocate. She understood the nature of the issue entirely and how it could be a win-win. And this, I will say, was critically important to our success, is our outreach to Allison and Allison herself being there. She had many meetings and discussions with the Department of Codes and Regs staff, which was smart, and got feedback from them. And she finally got by Codes and Regs Director Kirchdorfer sometime in the fall of 2021. And they, at that point, gave Barbara and I their feedback on what they wanted the new ordinance to have. And here is the story on that. There was good news and not so good news. And the good news was that Codes and Regs supported a new weeds ordinance. And it did state that Louisvillians would have the right to maintain a managed natural landscape. This is not just saying like mowing my grass anymore. That was an important case to make. And that the plantings would have to be within a defined area free of noxious weeds according to the code. So we get the state code made within our weed code. Also, I was happy to see that something that Barbara and I put into our initial draft that we offered them was a distinction be made between turf grasses like fescues and bluegrass, which are meant to be mowed, and native grasses, which are generally clump grasses that do not need to be mowed. So they were fine with that. But here's the not so good news, is that Department of Codes and Regs wanted a 5-foot rule, fences, and signs. So what's the 5-foot rule? It is a setback from all property lines, not just the front by the sidewalk, by 5 feet. You couldn't have native plants within 5 feet of any property line unless you erected a 4-foot-high opaque fence, which says to me, you know, it's like the presumption is that native plants are unwanted and ugly. But I guess Codes and Regs just wants to minimize complaints, and I get it. But also, we suggested a sign, but they said you must put up a sign stating this is a pollinator or native wildflower garden to advertise to passersby that there's intention here when we plant these native, unusual to most people, native plants. And at the time, Barbara and I felt that this discriminated against those people with small lots and small purses, because small lots are a lot of people with those shotgun style houses. They're very long rectangular lots. You take 5 feet away from the perimeter, that's a lot of land, or most of it, for planting natives. Also small, who's going to erect a 4-foot-high opaque fence all around their property? We weren't too happy about that, but tabled that, we expressed our views, and that is now sitting back with Allison and Codes and Regs folks to discuss again. But the new year came, and Barbara was so good at this. She arranged and made us an appointment with David James, the president of Metro Council, January 6th. And we had to do this by Zoom, COVID, etc. But and we emailed a 4-page presentation to him, and so we, doing things. This is the kind of stuff we did to stay organized. And Barbara made sure that there were 2 constituents from his district at this meeting, important to do. And Barbara and I discussed, and the 2 constituents discussed beforehand, how the meeting flow should go, so that we all kind of, presented an organized group to him, and, don't have greater impact and not waste his time. And so the first thing we're saying is, we are here to ask for your support for the newly revised weed ordinance. And as we expected, he asked, weed ordinance? What? So we kind of expected that. He just didn't know what was happening. So gave us, our in to tout how it would be a win-win for nature people and our city by bringing in the fact that the new code would promote the city's Plan 2040 goals, which have to do with sustainability and quality of life and air pollution, things like that. So bring it to something that he can latch on to. And also that it would provide not only individual people, but we have a young nascent native plant landscaping industry, groups of folks, businesses trying to start up, and they really need greater clarity for replacing lawn with managed natural landscapes that use native plants. And we touted again the benefits of managed natural landscaping using native plants, and you can see the bullet points there that I made before. And we made those points to him. And if you're trying to promote a shared vision with someone like this and convince them, a shared vision means visuals are important. In our case, we showed what we meant by natural managed landscapes using native plants. So he could have some kind of image to hold on to. We knew we were going to have to do this over and over again with folks because we suspected that they would be envisioning this as natural landscapes, which is basically an abandoned lot and just let whatever grow. And that's not what we're talking about. Made that plain. Well, it turned out President James was still for the 5-foot rule, and Codes and Regs Director would not budge on it. But Allison thankfully managed to enter a few exceptions to that rule and the fence that made it easier on gardeners besides the fence. So that was incorporated and made it a little more palatable. And so we knew compromise was going to be needed. And we came out on social media, et cetera, as supporting the new ordinance draft in discussion. And with not only Wild Ones and others, but the folks at Beargrass Thunder, another group that had been advocating for what was called yardins, having to do with being able to have vegetable gardens, et cetera, and native plants out in their front yards. That had been going on parallel in terms of awareness raising with Metro Council people. Anyway, James also told us that once he received the draft ordinance in bill form, it would go to Metro Council Public Works Committee. We asked him that way, where's it going next, assuming, once you get it. And that's important to know because then we knew who to lobby next. And that was the members of the Metro Council Works Committee. And so knowing the process is very advantageous. So the draft ordinance bill came out in early January, and Councilman Ja'Cory Arthur decided he wanted to sponsor the bill, and that was thanks to that parallel advocacy from Jody Dahmer and Beargrass Thunder. 2 weeks later, much to Barbara and I's surprise, President James co-sponsored the bill. So we think our prior meeting was likely influential in that, and it doesn't hurt to have the Metro Council president co-sponsor a bill. So now it was our turn, ball back in our court, to maintain broader citizen advocacy and mobilizing people. And the bill would be read into council February 3rd. We knew the Public Works Committee was February 10th. So all of a sudden, the process started moving way fast. So calls to action everywhere. And this is like one flyer that Becca Truman in Jefferson County Soil and Water District came out with for people, really nicely done. And we were on our Facebook page and certainly with personal connections asking, providing information and letter templates online. We solicited addressed to the bill's co-sponsors, the chair of Metro Council Public Works, not just from individuals, but from local environmental organizations, which many of those council people had good relationships with. Like Louisville Climate Action Network, Louisville Audubon Society, and the Jefferson County Soil and Water District, as well as Wild Ones. We wrote one as well. And also some neighborhood associations wrote in, and the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability, i.e. Allison, wrote a letter. And all these letters were entered into the public record that anyone could access. And then Barbara, again, she's just so good at just keeping that momentum going. She made sure we had at least 2 citizen speakers lined up for bi-weekly Metro Council meetings, which had to be remote at that time. And some told, and it's really good, some people told personal stories about being cited under this confusing old weed code, and others presented facts about why it would be an environmental win-win for people. So to have that mix. Public Works Committee met February 10th. Now, this was critical because if it didn't pass that committee, it wasn't gonna likely go on to Metro Council. So Alice orchestrated a PowerPoint. She got in some slides from me, and also Becca Truman spoke at this. But Allison orchestrated it all, and she did just a superb job of fielding committee member questions. We also tried to get ahead of that curve of questions by presenting some natural landscaping myths about like harboring rodents and things like that, which they don't do. A real coup was that the Director of Codes and Regs, Robert Kirchhofer, spoke in support and explained how the new ordinance would be better for his code enforcement officers. So getting that buy-in ahead of time was critical. The vote was tabled for another 2 weeks, but it gave us more time to mobilize citizen advocacy. And 2 weeks later, they voted unanimously for the new ordinance, which stunned us at the time. We were getting some deep questions and vibes that I don't know about this, but they went for it. And then just a week or so later, 10 days later, Metro Council, they had some questions, et cetera, but they voted unanimously for the new ordinance. Hooray, hooray. And it was signed into law by the mayor just several days later. So start to finish was 13 months. We did have a little party, those of us who were intimately involved in this, but the public, now it's up to us really, largely, for the public education piece to continue. The Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability came out with a lovely brochure explaining the weed code, the new weed code. We also put the weed code up on Facebook, on Wild Ones Louisville's Facebook page. It's always anchored there. We, Jefferson County Soil and Water, offered to make those signs so that those who can't afford a sign can get one, a pollinator garden sign. And the code enforcement officers receive training on recognizing native plants. So that continues. So what can we learn from this success? I think several things on the next 2 slides. It seemed to us like the stars were aligned, and maybe they were, but you all know it takes more than that. And it really did take a village. We were very also fortunate to have Allison as a savvy governmental advocate. There were a lot of interactions amongst citizen advocates, staff in different governmental agencies, and the council. And so one of the big things for any collaborative efforts to succeed, one needs trust, shared motivation and work, and capacity for joint action. And that's the thing. I mean, all of us have our own individual abilities and traits, but by working together collaboratively, we became more than the sum of our parts in achieving this common purpose. Also, social media makes it way easier to reach people. A list of things I was reflecting on is recommendations. Know your goals and why it's important, and not just to your group. Are there co-benefits to other groups of people? And, you know, environmental health equals human health is normally such an easy point to make. Use it, bring it back to people, their health and their quality of life. Learn the political process involved, know who your community allies are, link up with them, listen, talk, prepare to do some of the work, some of the writing as we did as a suggested draft in this instance, and provide fact-based convincing arguments that other stakeholders can buy into. So that's part of cultivating that shared vision. And meet face-to-face, even a Zoom meeting face-to-face with relevant politicians ahead of time, and state your case succinctly. And don't forget to ask for their thoughts and advice at the end. They are part. We're not just telling them what we think. We want to know what they think. We learn from this, and they feel like part of the process too. Keep communication lines open between each other and key advocates in government during the process, while not being a pain in the neck about it. Involve departments and staff who will be affected by the ordinance and get their buy-in ahead of time, and know when and why to compromise. And lastly, persist, be patient, but be prepared for when all of a sudden the process can move really fast. So here's one half of the pamphlet, the new weed ordinance rules explained in a nice brochure printed by the Office of Advanced Planning and Sustainability, and just saying, linking it to two organizations where people can ask questions of for continued education. Doing this really opened up the ability of different groups to now start offering and doing things to, entice people to grow native plants on their property. And one of the first ones this spring was Rewilding Louisville, funded by Idlewild Butterfly Farm, Creasy Mahan Preserve, and the Louisville Audubon Society. And that was, we're still, there were a lot of takers and applicants for that. And we will be evaluating that this fall. And now a new one, September 15th, put out by the Jefferson County Soil and Water District, and that people can apply to for this. So thanks to them also, as well as for the signs, which are going to be coming out, I think, next week, Becca told me. So at this point, I'm done, and I hope to hear about your questions, and I hope you found it valuable. Thanks.